Welcome to the Casual Author Podcast. I'm Dan, sci-fi and fantasy author. Like you, I've got a lot on my plate. What with many children, a full-time job, a homestead, and loads of other responsibilities. I'm here to bring you inspiration, positivity, and community around having a busy life and still wanting to chase that author dream, even if you have to take a casual approach. For more information about the podcast, me, or my books, head to thecasualauthor.com. Let's get started. How are you this evening, Brittany?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. That is the proper way to pronounce your name, correct?
It
Okay,
is.
okay.
It's Brittany.
Perfect. The spelling is something so unique I've not seen before, but I thought that it was Brittany. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm so excited for you to be here today because you are actually the first romance author that I've had the opportunity to speak with, which is kind of exciting because one, I don't generally read romance, so I'm very unfamiliar with the whole realm of romance. And two, I just feel like it's really exciting to see someone else's perspective with a different genre. Normally, I'm talking to like fantasy, suspense authors and whatnot. So that's exciting. I'm curious to know, where are you in your author career as of now? How long have you been writing?
My first book was published in 2014, but I've pretty much been writing for as long as I can remember. But
And
yeah,
are you independently published or do you have like a small
I am.
publisher?
No, I'm
Okay.
independently published.
So what made you decide to go with independent publishing for 2014? So it's 7 years ago.
Yeah. So I was trying to pitch some of my books to different, agents, because with the big publishers, you have to have an agent. And I just kept getting like the response, like, this isn't it's not selling to market, or
Mm,
you're not in our like market right now. Cause I think when I first started out, dystopian was really big.
mm,
And then that's about when like, a lot of the bigger romance things came out, and I kept having agents saying, you need to add sex or whatever to your books. I'm like, this is not what I want to do. I don't want to have somebody telling me how to write or what to write. So I had a friend that was like, you should try looking at indie publishing. So I'm like, okay. Started doing some research and was like, okay, let's just do it. Let's just try it. And if I don't like it, then I what have I lost? Like, just some time and a little bit of money.
yeah.
I'm so excited that I did that, because I have friends that are on both sides, and they say, you have to give up so much control to a publisher, whereas independent, like, I get to make all those decisions and I can write on my time. And with 4 kids, that's kind of important. I don't like being on strict deadlines, because like this book that I'm writing now, it was supposed to be out in August, and here we are, December. And I'm pretty much probably going to scrap it again and rewrite it, because I just don't like it. And so,
Mm.
because I'm independently published, I can do that. I don't have to stress about it, and I'm not putting stuff out that I'm not proud of.
I think that's amazing. And I totally agree. That's part of the reason I decided to go with indie publishing as well. We won't go into my story because, people have heard that. But I think it's great that you said the complete control. And, the part of the reason I started this podcast, The Casual Authors, because many of us, like you and me, have just so many other responsibilities. I mean, 4 kids, that's a lot going on, right? With,
Mm-hmm.
school and activities
Yeah.
and all sorts of things, just running a house. And I believe your husband was probably away from home for some time, right? Because he was in the military,
Yeah.
right? Correct.
Yeah, he was deployed for a year, and then my daughter has had some health issues. So that year I thought I wasn't going to put anything out, and it ended up being like that was my outlet, but I wasn't on like a deadline. So I'm like, I don't have to push
Yeah.
this out, but I'm writing to like, it was like therapy just to kind of cope with everything that was going on. And I ended up putting like 2 books out that year, which is unheard of for me. I'm like one a year if I'm lucky.
That's awesome. That's
So
great.
yeah, it was really good. And it's like you said, the creative freedom. Like, if I don't like a cover, I just finished working on a cover. I can just tell her like, hey, I don't like it. Let's try this. Whereas when you're traditionally published, it's like whatever the publisher wants goes, and you don't have quite as much control over it. And if you don't like it, oh well. Um, and this one I could kind of like play around and do what feels right for me. which is
That
fun. Like, I don't want to give up control of my baby.
absolutely, and we shouldn't have to, right? And once again, this is not, and I know you're not saying this, and I'm not saying this is in no way a knock on traditional publishing. It just really
No,
comes down to, as an author, where do you prefer your rights to stay, or to give certain rights? And I agree with you. I
yeah.
think there's a sweetness to that independent publishing, to having full control over
Mhm.
things like covers, like you said, and content.
And some
Which is,
people like giving that control over,
yeah,
and some people like, so you make the decisions for me, and that's fine. But I
uh-huh.
like having,
Control.
I like being able to say, nope, I don't like it. Let's start it over. Or like with the book that I'm writing now, like, I don't like it, so I'm going to scrap it and write it over. If it was with an editor or a publisher or something, and be like, this is what you need to write, especially with romance, it's like, okay, you need to add sex scenes. Well, I don't like writing those, and I don't want them in
Mm-hmm.
my book. So I get to make that call, not a
Mm-hmm.
publisher or not an agent.
And that's actually a perfect segue, because I just want to clarify, so you write Christian romance specifically,
Mm-hmm.
correct? So
Yes.
generally clean, non-spicy, so to speak. There's all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
terms that you can use to describe whatever happens in romance books. But
Yeah.
you were telling me earlier that you're having a little bit of a hard time recognizing what specific genre your books fit
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, it was because I started writing out my first two books for fantasy, and then I had this big idea for like a romance. Well, at the time, it was 50 Shades of Grey was the big thing, and I'm like,
Oh
well,
boy.
I mean, I read them just because I'm like, what? I wanted to know what everybody was talking about,
Yeah.
and I'm like, okay, this is not my cup of tea, but it's really popular now. So what if we took it and made like, I want a clean romance, and I want the female to be the billionaire, not the male main character. And I wanted it to be like something that my dad wouldn't blush reading.
Yeah.
And I just can't write those scenes. It's always been like, those type of things are between, for me, it's between me and my husband, and it's
Yeah.
not something I like read. Like, if I read plenty of romance where that's in there, but I usually skip through it because it's not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I just can't write those scenes. It's just not. When I was thinking about doing it, it was always like a brick wall, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, you can still have the romance and the tension and the chemistry without the explicit scenes. um so it took me a while to kind of like say, okay, there's a market for that. I had to research and find out, like, I was being told, like, you're never going to sell it. There's no sex scenes. You're not going to sell it. And I'm like, well, as a reader, I don't look for that. So there's got to be other people like me that look for the same thing. And it took me a while. And I'm like, there is an audience for that. There's whole categories on Amazon for clean romance and sweet romance. And then I'm like, okay, well, my faith is a big part of it. There's a whole genre of Christian romance and Christian mystery and Christian suspense. So I kind of jumped into that. And once I found that sweet spot and started writing like what I was feeling called to write and not what I thought would sell, um, I started, like, when I first made my first profit, I'm like, yes, like, it's not much, but it's something when you're breaking even, or putting money in for so long. When you finally make, even if it's a couple dollars, like, that's a big victory for an author. So once I kind of like stopped fighting it and found that sweet spot, that's where things kind of turned around. And it's been really good. I'm really blessed. And I found a huge audience, like TikTok and Facebook and all. Like, people are looking for that kind of stuff. So it was fun to find other readers that are like, I've been looking for this kind of romance. I don't like the scenes, or it's just not my thing. Or I want to be able to read this. I think somebody messaged me and was like, I want to be able to read this with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And she likes romances, but we can't read, romances with those scenes together. It's just not something you want to do with your mother. Um, so that made me happy to hear other people say, like, I can read this with my mom, or I can read this with my teenage daughter, and I don't have to be afraid about, the sex scenes or profanity, um, which I didn't want in the book either. But you're writing military men, so it's like, okay, you got to get creative, because most of them have, they let it slip. So you had to get creative with that. And I had some readers who were like, oh, I think there was one review on one of my books that was like, it wasn't realistic because all military men have sex and all military men have, potty mouths. And I'm like, it's not true. And you can write that stuff without being explicit about it. There's fade to black, there's, use your imagination. That's what reading is about, is like you get this picture and you use your imagination to picture these things with your characters. So that was fun, like hearing other people say, this is what I've been looking for, books without this stuff, because I just don't like reading it. And that was the same thing for me, like finding other authors to connect with, especially when it seems to be like the spicy stuff seems to be what is popular right now on TikTok and
All over.
Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm finding more and more people, and I'm finding people that are saying thanks for sharing, because I've been looking for other authors. So I'm trying to make lists of other non-spicy authors to suggest, especially across the different genres. It's not just romance. I mean, you're finding it in like sci-fi and all now, and the
Fantasy for sure.
um, yeah, it seems like that's becoming a big thing, and I'm like, well, there's still people like me that want it without. So I like looking for other authors and connecting with other authors that are kind of on the same wavelength as I am. Like, we're not looking to put that in our books. That's just not who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been fun. It's been an experience for sure, because when I first started connecting it's with other romance authors, it's like everybody's spicy or
Mm-hmm.
semi-spicy. I'm like, there's none of that in my books.
Well, I think it's great that you said, like, so you talked specifically earlier about creative control, which is one amazing thing about being an independent author. But two, you mentioned like there's this weird stigma for authors. There's this pressure sometimes for them to write to market, right? What they think readers want to read. And I'm like you. I don't write spicy stuff. I don't write profanity. Like if I'm using quotations, swear words in my books, they're often made up. They're not real words, right? It's
Yeah.
this fantasy world where I'm creating this new thing, which, my fake swear words often tickle people. They think they're funny, but I don't mind. Like that's the type of stuff that I read. I've been reading since I was a kid, loved fantasy since I was a kid, and I've never, delved into books with spice. And so, like you said, I just don't prefer to write that. But yeah, there is, like you said, there is this kind of weird stigma nowadays where if you don't have spice, it's not popular or can't be popular. But that's not necessarily true. You mentioned you found your market, you found your people, even though you kind of had to probably dig a little bit. And I think that's mainly because generally, because of the stigma around books, romance books specifically needing sex scenes, I think there's actually a lot of people that are a little bit not ashamed, but nervous to admit that they don't like to read spice. And this isn't a knock on anybody, but I'm the same way. Like I just wouldn't come out and be like, well, I don't read spice, right? Just because I'm a little bit not embarrassed, I guess. Just like we just kind of hide under the woodwork, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's great that you found those people, that you're bringing them out. They're like, yeah, once I find other people, I'm proud to say like, oh, yeah, I don't read spice. I don't read profanity. I prefer not to. And then you just kind of connect with each other, and it's great you found that market. But like, how did you go about finding that market? What kinds of things did you have to do to find those people?
Lots of research, and spending a lot of time like browsing Amazon categories and trying to see, what people who were buying my books, what else were they buying. And it took a long time for that to kind of pick up, because I was miscategorizing my books for so long because I just threw them in romance because I didn't know any better. And I didn't really have a whole lot of people telling me what to do, like how to do things when I first started out, because the Facebook groups weren't as big of a thing when I first started publishing, and now you have all these really awesome groups, and networking through TikTok and on. It seemed to be like it wasn't that big of a deal even 7 years ago. I know that sounds crazy, but now it's like all these authors. I've had a couple authors that are like, hey, maybe you should try this category, maybe you should try this category. And I tried sweet category, and I'm like, wait, this is not really fitting the definition of sweet, because you have a lot of action. And I'm like, oh, suspense is actually a big thing too, and romantic suspense. So it took a lot of like researching and talking with other authors that have read my books or that browse through them. Like, hey, what would you categorize this in? And asking a lot of questions. The 20 books to 50K group has been a really big resource for me. Just even reading other people's posts, not necessarily posting on my own, but it's like testing the waters and seeing what other people are trying and then trying it. And I love talking with other authors, because I'm like, what works for me might not work for you, but I'd like to hear what other people are trying, so that I can try it too, because especially with like ads and stuff like that, it's really crazy. Like I do really good with Amazon ads, but not Facebook ads. Whereas I've had other authors that tell me the reverse. So it's like you have to try a whole bunch of things before you find the sweet spot for you, which is tricky. But it's also, it makes a lot of sense because what I write isn't going to be what you write. So your audience is going to be different, and what your audience looks for is going to be different. But it took a good 1.5 to 2 years to really find a good genre that wouldn't anger readers who are looking for the spice and pick up my book and don't realize, hey, this is not spicy, there's not going to be sex or swear words in it. And again, like you said, it's not bashing those, there's just people that just don't like to read that, and that's fine. That's what's so awesome about books, is there's something for everybody. And you just got to find the author that's right for you. And networking, that was a big thing, is like connecting with other authors like you. And I have a bunch of other author friends now that I talk to regularly, and bouncing ideas off of them, and finding like, hey, try this category or try this category and see if it works. And when I found that Christian romance and suspense, it was like, okay, I found my people, this is where it needs to be. And things kind of took off after that. So it's a lot of research and a lot of trial and error, mainly. Trying things, and if it doesn't work, try something else. But yeah, a lot of trial and error and research.
So this is a very important conversation for someone like me. I've only been publishing. I published my first book in the middle of 2000. One was 19, I believe, was when I published my first book. So May 2019. Second one at the beginning of this year, and my third one just a couple months ago. But yeah, the whole category thing feels like this massive enigma. I mean, I've only recently tried to shift things around, give it a try, but it's really encouraging to hear someone who's been public for upwards of 7 years. And the types of experience you've had trying to trial and error, and you eventually found your spot. Just really hoping that I can find my spot. I'm having a little bit of a hard time because, once again, mine doesn't have spice as well. There's no swear words. It's just definitely a clean. So I mean, there's action, and it's there's blood, there's fighting. I mean, it's fantasy, but there's none of the other stuff. So it's just encouraging to hear that. But so are there any other challenges for writing in this genre that you found? I mean, you've talked about that having to find your audience. You've talked about kind of the flack, so to speak, that you've received from people who expected spice and didn't get it. Were there any other challenges from writing in this genre, or just writing in general, that you found?
I think with the genre specific thing, a lot of people are like, oh, it's Christian romance, like you must be trying to shove the Bible down my throat. And I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do. Like, I talk about God, and the character has, their faith is part of a big drive of how she and he react to, different things, and finding faith again after, losing it. So I've had a couple people that have told me, like, it's under Christian romance, but they didn't, and they're, not really necessarily Christian, but they've enjoyed reading it. It wasn't like trying to tell people, like, I'm not trying to shove the Bible down your throat. That's not what this is about. You just, faith is a big part. So it's a good category to put it in. So getting over that stigma, like people who normally wouldn't read Christian romance, trying to, tell them, like, you can still read it and not feel like I'm trying to, like, convert you. Like, I just feel like my faith is a big part of who I am, so it's gonna translate into these characters. And then my fantasy, I guess I just found Christian fantasy, and I didn't know that was a thing, and it's like mainly just like the author is a Christian, so a lot of things translate. It's like, Chronicles of Narnia is actually kind of a Christian fantasy, and people don't realize that. So finding that category was kind of cool, and seeing your book do well in a category for once, because you actually have it in a relevant category, is really cool.
Yeah.
But getting over like the Christian label, I'm like, you can try it and read the first book, and if it's not your cup of tea, like, thanks for trying me. But trying to get other people that wouldn't normally read Christian romance, or some people are like, I've never read romance without the spice. Well, try it. Just try it. If you don't like it, cool, you tried a new thing. And I've had a couple people that said before, I would never try this, but they really liked that there was action and suspense. So that's what made them try the book out. So getting over the no spice and then the Christian label to get others who wouldn't normally read those things it's been difficult, but it's been fun because I love having people message me and be like, hey, I tried your book and I normally don't read that. So that's been cool. And then just finding the time to write with 4 kids and a cross-country move. And I am on the 3rd. I've scrapped this book that I'm writing 3 or 4 times because it just doesn't feel right. But I found that having a writing accountability partner has been like a game changer because I was stuck on one book and I sat down with her for a good 30 or 45 minutes and we bounced off my problems and my ideas. And I had an aha moment the other night after talking to her and then hearing her. She's had this story that she's been trying to write since her and I first kind of connected. And she's really getting into that. So it's been fun to watch her stories evolve too. So it's not just about like what I'm getting from it, but watching another author like overcome the same speed bumps that I've had has been really kind of cool. And watching her blossom, and I'm really excited to see her book come out. So it's a very beneficial relationship, and I keep telling everybody, like, find a partner. I know it sounds crazy, and I was hesitant to do it, but as soon as I did it, it was like, not only am I being held accountable to write at least several times a week, because sometimes it just doesn't happen. Everybody's like, you have to write every day. Well, with 4 kids and having some health issues myself, I'm like, it's not gonna happen every day. It just is not. But she's like, have you written this week? Yeah, I've written a little bit. Okay, well, you wrote something, so that's good. Are you not writing because you're having an issue, or are you not writing because you're not feeling good, or are you not writing because you just don't have the time? Well, if there's an issue, she's like, okay, well, talk to me about it. What's your problem? Let's talk through it. Whereas, like, I can talk to my husband or my friend about it, but they're not a writer, so they're not going to quite understand some things. Like, I found a big plot hole in my book, and I found it because she pointed it out and was like, hey, you're going to have issues with this, try this. So it's been good because it's helped me overcome a lot of like the mental roadblocks. I'm sure you have too. Like, you overthink things. And then even talking through her issues, I'm like, hey, I'm giving her this advice. This is something I need to take in for myself for the problems that I'm having now. So that's been fun, and it's been a game changer, really. Every time I find a new author, I'm like, find a partner. It doesn't even, she writes more historical romance, but it's still like, you still have the same issues. You're going to have character problems, and you're going to have characters that don't want to cooperate, and you're going to have plot holes, and you're going to run into plot problems. So her saying, okay, having an outside view, well, this is your problem. You can simplify it. That was the biggest thing, is I'm trying to overcomplicate this plot. And she's like, you don't need all that. Just make it simple. Like, it still works. It's going to take care of 99% of your problems. I'm like, yes, I need to do that. So that's been a big change and help.
That is amazing. That's actually the second time this week that I've talked to someone who recommended getting another person called it a critique partner, but I suppose it's probably a similar experience, a specific person that you keep accountable with, you talk to. Admittedly, I don't have one. So that's something that I would really like to have, that type of support. I agree, your spouse is definitely someone who cares about motivating you and helping you feel good about what you're doing. However, they don't have quite the deep understanding of this. These are the problems that an author experiences. So that's something we could probably do a whole session on critique or accountability partners, and perhaps I will with you another time someday. But the one thing that I am a little bit curious about is, how did you find this individual? Is it someone that it was a friend that you've known for some time, or did you meet them kind of happenstance via social media? I'm just curious to know how that relationship was found.
So it was in another romance Facebook group. So I found this group because of an author friend. Her husband was in the Coast Guard too, and we ended up living like 5 minutes down the road from each other
cool.
until we both moved. And she's like, get on my romance group. I've been on her podcast a few times, and it's been really fun because they do have like a mix of romance authors. But they posted like, hey, are you looking for an accountability partner? And you comment and you said, hey, I was looking for someone that wrote clean or sweet or suspense or something along that line. And she was historical romance, but she's like me. She doesn't write, explicit scenes. She doesn't write profanity. And we started talking and realized that we were a good fit. So I'm like, hey, let's try, we try to sprint once or twice a week together, and that we make sure like we're getting some kind of writing in that week. And then there was a week I couldn't really write because I wasn't feeling good. She's like, hey, I need you to still message me and be like, have you written today? If you haven't, you need to get on and write today. So it was another relationship that blossomed out of like networking and finding a good group. That's a big thing I tell newbie authors. I'm like, find Facebook groups or TikTok groups or Discord groups or something, because you're gonna find something, you're gonna get something out of it, whether it's advice or an accountability partner. You can talk to other authors and find out what didn't work for them. Things I wish I had done differently when I started, things I wish I hadn't done at all, or things that, hey, don't spend your money on this, spend your money on that, because, as an independent author, you're in charge of editing, you're in charge of covers, you're in charge of marketing, and that all costs money. So I'm like, if I can keep another author from wasting their money, and using it to be, something that's going to help them more. Hey, try this instead. I found it worked better and I got more out of my money this way versus this way. Or, hey, who did you use for a marketing, or what marketing things have worked, like BookBub and all those other book apps. What worked for you? What did you feel like you flushed your money down the toilet with? So networking, that's a huge thing, is find a group. Mainly on Facebook. I found more on Facebook, but I know Discord's becoming a really big thing with authors. It's one of those things where I'm like, I just don't have the time to keep up with another form of social media because we've got so much as it is.
Yep, there's so many things to try to stay on top of. So I totally know how that is. I'm actually a part of a number of Facebook and Discord groups. And admittedly, I don't have tons of time. Yeah, casual. Let's just say that there's just so much going on. But well, I appreciate you joining me this evening. I'd love you to tell the listeners, where can they find you? Where can they find information about your books? Just let us know.
I'm on Facebook under Britaini Armitage, and TikTok. I've been on Facebook and TikTok a little more. I can also be found on Instagram under my same name. I kept it simple because my name is complicated enough. And all my books are currently on Kindle Unlimited,
Cool.
Amazon and Kindle Unlimited.
Excellent. And do you have a website as well that people can visit by any chance?
I keep forgetting about that. It's just BritaniArmitage.com.
Okay, and the spelling of your name will be in the name of the podcast, just so that people can find it. But yeah, BritaniArmitage.com, is that correct?
Correct.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you again. I hope you have an excellent evening.
Thank you for having me.
For sure.